Welcome to Minnesota Made, where the focus is on all things manufacturing. This podcast is brought to you by the St. Paul Port Authority, hosted by Andrea Novak and Rhett Hebig. This episode of Minnesota Made is sponsored by the Minnesota Precision Manufacturing Association. MPMA's vision is for Minnesota to be the recognized leader in precision manufacturing and related technologies. For more information, go to mpma.com. So welcome to Minnesota Made, where we talk all things manufacturing. An article in Forbes.com, which ran earlier this week, referenced that, quote, "We are experiencing what some call a tsunami of technical change." The article goes on to say that this tsunami may be as disruptive for us as the Industrial Revolution was for the people of the 19th century.
With us today to talk about how automation is impacting jobs in the manufacturing sector is Steve Kalina, Executive Director of the Minnesota Precision Manufacturing Association and former president of Dynamic Group, a privately owned manufacturer specializing in providing complex injection molded plastic components and assemblies and high precision molds for plastic and powder. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, let's just start talking about a little bit about your history working in the manufacturing industry. And you had mentioned that you had worked your way up from an entry-level position all the way up to the president of the company.
Yeah, and actually it was a family business that I was a part of, so I predates my 20 years at Dynamic Group. I actually worked there part-time in my teenage years, cleaning toilets and pulling weeds, and then basically the rule was you didn't come back unless you had some kind of experience or training. And so a few years later I came back and basically started off in an entry-level role and as a press operator running machines and doing manual labor. And so when we talk about automation today, it is near and dear to my heart because I know some of the jobs that people don't really want to do, pushing buttons and moving things back and forth, monotonous, tedious tasks that unfortunately we can't even find people to do today if we wanted to, and I wouldn't want to ask people to do those things. So I take to heart some of the things that we're trying to do with on the automation front, and obviously throughout the years I was able to move into more supervisory and managerial roles and executive roles where I got to make more of those decisions on how we improved the workplace and, of course, improved our efficiency and profitability on jobs. So,
very cool. So then the press operator is the one where you literally grab it from overhead and pull down, correct?
So in our case, it was injection molding, so it's an injection molding press.
Okay.
So in some cases, you're opening and closing doors with your hands. Some cases, you're loading or unloading inserts or retracting steel core pins from the inside a part or assembling, disassembling, things like that. So just a lot of manual dexterity, activities that, again, you might be doing thousands of times over again, and not exactly the most exciting or rewarding work at times.
It is not. I'm going to say I spent one summer at a steel company
Sure.
putting joist supports in a box. And if I remember correctly, you had to go 1311, 1311, over and over and over and over all day long.
You'll never forget it, will you?
No, that, and I used to run a called a palletizer machine. And that was a little bit of a bigger deal, watching cans come onto the pallet. That was a good job.
Sounds like a great summer.
So what then brought you to MPMA?
So over my years, Dynamic Group was actually a member of MPMA for the better part of 40 years. And so in my entire career, I was exposed to MPMA. And my father, that was the founder of our company, one of two founders, he did a great job getting me engaged with MPMA and getting to know a lot of the people.
So you talk about having 20 years in the manufacturing world. In that time, how have you seen automation evolve?
Well, I think a lot of our members, especially that I'll speak to a little bit more today, again, the precision manufacturing, and oftentimes that means maybe lesser volumes and more value add, more labor-intense work that's a little bit less commodity, a little less repetitive. So when you take some of the commodity type work that's obviously been done for hundreds of years manufacturing-wise, and when you're producing millions of parts, you can justify the full automation and investment in that. And so the typical automation that's been around for a long time is still there today. Fully automated work cells that are taking out every aspect of the labor and picking and placing and loading and unloading and assembling, disassembling, things like that. What I've seen over the years, though, is a transition to, I guess, a more integrated approach with the human capital as well. So rather than just focusing on taking the labor element out and taking the cost out, we're looking at finding ways to reduce the labor also because you can't find the labor, and again, reducing some of those tedious tasks. So some of the things that I found with our workforce was that people actually really enjoyed some of the assembly operations. And those are things that are much more complicated to assemble or to automate, which companies can do that, and they often do. But again, at that point, you need to justify it with high volume. The low volume work, it's typically still done manually, and so people do enjoy that a little bit more than just the opening and closing doors. However, there are still aspects of it. When you're assembling something, you still often have a movement from A to B in many cases, and so finding ways to automate that, taking out some of the tedious tasks, reducing some of the labor content, but also reducing some of the reliance on that labor has enabled us to get more creative with automation. So some of the technology that's there now with, say, cobots and automation that's more integrated with the existing equipment, we can just find ways to minimize the labor content, not taking the person out of the mix, but taking some of the steps out of it. And that's one area that we really focused on was the cobots. We invested in universal robots that are 6-axis collaborative robots that could work side by side with operators. So again, we had operations where we might have 3 or 4 operators, and they'd be fumbling over each other and again doing tedious tasks, and wasn't real rewarding, and obviously very high labor content. There were times where we couldn't run operations because we couldn't find the people, and so finding ways to just automate portions of that, and then in the end, what you can take as an operator who now learns how to utilize the robot, learns how to either program it or at least troubleshoot with it, and now is just doing the value-added activities, and it's kind of cool to just be sitting alongside a robot. So just more creative applications that allow us to take low volume or more complex activities and still automate portions of it.
So it's really taking an actual look and analyzing the whole process itself and seeing where you can implement a robot as well as the actual employee as well, and how they can work side by side to really speed up the process, not necessarily use the robot to replace an actual employee.
Yeah, exactly.
If
in some cases, it may be speeding up the process and reducing cycle times. In some cases, just, again, where you can't find a person to fill that role, and so you're just at least able to produce the product. In many cases, too, and again, in precision manufacturing, we're often talking low volume, and it's many one-off projects where most of the time you can't justify automation in a one-off job shop type product where you're building something to someone else's specifications once and never again. Now you can find ways to automate that process, not just automate the actual product, but automate the process, say the inspection activity or the loading or unloading, or there's adaptive machining where basically the machine can react to what your initial process is and be able to do the follow-up steps. So because setup is oftentimes the biggest portion of an actual process, the machining time might take an hour, but it might take 2 hours of setup and inspection work. So that allows you to get more through that machine, and oftentimes then run into off hours where you maybe don't have the labor, but you can keep the machine running lights out.
And so this kind of leads into the next question. So how do you see robotics and automation influencing jobs in manufacturing? So do you see that there's a challenge because now we're losing jobs, or do you see it more of the benefit because now you don't have to fill the jobs that people didn't want? And are you seeing a higher level of employee satisfaction now that there isn't quite all of the menial tasks? When I was using my example, that was 25 years ago that,
Sure.
Maybe people don't have to do that now because there's more job satisfaction. So
Right.
Curious to see what side of the pendulum do you land?
To be clear, right now we're definitely not losing jobs. We're right now manufacturing is, I think I saw a statistic from Deed recently that had, I think, 140-some thousand jobs that we're short right now in the state of Minnesota. And that's expected to continue to rise over the next few years. So we're definitely short on workforce right now. So MPMA actually just launched our new strategic plan for the next few years, and it's focused primarily on workforce development. And so we're trying to fill the pipeline with new employees and engage the youth and get people interested in manufacturing, and then retain them by engaging with them, providing apprenticeship programs and continued skill development, and through grant money and things like that. So we're doing everything we can creatively to engage the existing workforce. Well, as a kind of a dual path, we have to also look at how do we get by without the workers that we need, because we are not going to fill 250,000 positions in the next few years. And one of the problems also is, as we talk about competition for those workers, is not just manufacturer to manufacturer. It's every company across the state. I mean, when Amazon came in and started advertising for $15 an hour with no experience, and you don't need to speak English, and you can they'll pick you up in a shuttle or something. The manufacturers for that more entry level labor are competing with that, and that makes it awful tough. So,
well, and it's good to hear too, because anytime you see any commercial or this, that, and the other thing, there's one commercial that I always remember. It's almost like, I think she works at like a toothpaste factory or something, and she gets replaced by a robot. Whereas reality is you're actually bringing in robots to help the process, but as well as that new workforce that comes in to work alongside the robot is going to learn and be able to grow up in manufacturing and continue to grow their career, which is something you did too.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about enhancing the quality of those jobs. So again, at the entry level, it's really easy to show, because if you're, again, that person opening and closing a door, it's a big step up then to be working with the automation and learning that. But even beyond that, most companies, smaller companies, don't necessarily have application engineers and automation engineers. And so we've got to find a way to help them engage their current workforce, the incumbent workforce, in engaging in kind of the application engineering. So if you take a machinist who really understands their machine, how do we engage them in learning how to automate it? And again, it's not just, it could be adding a automation system and a full gantry robot or more traditional system onto a machine. But it also may, again, be using the technology that's already in that machine to begin with, and how do you pull it out? How do you learn how to program it? How do you apply it to your process? So that's part of what that workforce development has got to be, is how do you engage the current workforce? And again, at the same time, that makes it that much more appealing to the youth. When we talk to students in STEM programs, we're trying to promote manufacturing, but in reality what they're seeing is the excitement in engineering, which is a great field, but unfortunately we can't have all kids become engineers. We need some of them to become hands-on manufacturers. And so if we can kind of bridge that gap to make it clear that those manufacturing positions are also involving engineering and math and still the hands-on skills, and so that involving and integrating that automation just makes it that much more appealing for those youth.
And what is the training process for someone to be able to run the machine or take hold of the automation piece?
So typically what happens with a lot of manufacturers, especially if they don't have necessarily their own automation department with automation engineers, they typically rely on the OEMs, the manufacturer of the automation itself, that they'll come in, install the automation, train the users, and kind of help them kick that off. Which what I've seen is oftentimes that restricts that manufacturer to that one application. If they have the time and resources, they can start expanding beyond that. But oftentimes we're busy, we're trying to get the product out the door. That machinist has got to focus on that application. It doesn't necessarily have time to start trying to apply that to other areas. Some companies are very good about that, but some companies just, again, don't have the resources. So the schools, many of the schools have great automation programs, and that gets a good baseline. And obviously, if someone gets experience at a larger company where they've already integrated automation, they can come and bring that to other companies. But oftentimes, it's kind of on-the-job training and learning by experience. And again, some of the automation that's out there now is so user-friendly that I know when we got our first collaborative robot, it showed up on our dock, I think, at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, banded down, palletized, and at 2 o'clock we had it running its first program.
Wow.
That was picking up a piece of paper and moving it across a bench, but still it was that easy to kind of figure out and learn how to operate.
Yeah, that's still incredible that you got it up and going in an hour.
Well, half that time was unpackaging it.
So do people fighting over who gets to run it?
Yeah, we had, I don't know if I'd say fighting over, but definitely people, seem to enjoy the role that much more. And just, again, it's exciting to be a part of that. I mean, for our whole company, when we first got those robots going, and people were walking by and taking video cameras or videos of it, and they actually Universal Robots actually used us as a case study and did a lot of marketing using us. When we actually had a bit in the Wall Street Journal and a few different news medias. So it was exciting, and it just again makes it a little bit more rewarding for those operators that are focusing on the value add work rather than the repetitive task.
So then, is it safe to say that the larger manufacturers are earlier adapters to automation? And is automation more cost prohibitive for a smaller manufacturer?
Well, again, some of the options now are breaking down that barrier, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, 30, 40 years ago. Obviously, people were automating things, but the automation historically has been, again, for the larger volume, larger companies that can afford it. I know there's companies that will invest multi-millions of dollars into one work cell for one program, and obviously a small $10 million revenue company is not going to be able to do that. So I'd say it has been prohibitive. It still is, because it's still an expense, and again, not just the capital expense, but the resources, the engineering resources, the time. That can be a challenge. But again, those barriers are coming down where, again, the schools are teaching it. Just in general, obviously, kids' exposure to automation is becoming more prevalent. Kids are buying their first 3D printer, I'm sure, in high school now, and taking a tech ed class where they can learn, CNC programming things. So they're getting more engaged in the automation side of things, so that when they get to these companies, I think it becomes more second nature. So it's still a challenge, and again, MPMA is going to try and find ways to break down those barriers farther to help those companies figure out how to not just purchase automation and where to purchase it, but actually how to implement it and apply it to their operations.
Right. And are there any unintended costs of not automating? So what happens if a manufacturer decides not to invest?
Well, I can tell you, not only from my experience, but also other members or other manufacturers, it's a constant challenge with customer base, primarily OEMs, where they're looking for cost downs. So customers are not okay with maintaining pricing throughout the course of a program, and in many cases are coming back looking for double-digit price reductions year after year, and it becomes painful and challenging to instead of just focusing on trying to make process improvements for quality, you're looking at cost reductions, which of course should be a part of business. It is an improvement we should all be focusing on. But at the end of the day, it becomes a life or death situation as far as your program and whether that customer is going to stay with you or not. So you've got to focus on reducing those costs, and just working harder and working faster isn't going to do it. So I think automation is required in many of those cases. And again, if you don't automate and you can't find the workers, I'm hearing more and more manufacturers now that are saying they're turning away work for the first time possibly ever in their history. So that's painful. And then obviously employee retention. If you're not doing things to improve the workplace and make it more enjoyable, more challenging, more engaging, those employees are going to go elsewhere. And the companies that do automate and become more profitable, and again, you're reducing those lower labor positions and increasing the higher, more engaged positions, you get to pay more. And so the companies that are embracing that are going to be able to take those employees, and the companies that aren't are going to lose them.
I think it's just so interesting to hear how manufacturing is, say if you work in manufacturing, even at the lower levels, that you are working with technology and a robot every single day. You're not, just moving stuff around or putting something into a machine that'll press it a certain way, or it's a lot more, I would say, technologically advanced than what most people think of when they hear, manufacturing, which is cool to hear.
Yeah, and there's still definitely the shops that are not up to speed with things and are not appealing, and unfortunately, those companies are kind of struggling to keep up. And our goal is to improve the image of manufacturing, and so just even cleanliness and organization of the workplace. And when you walk through a shop that's well lit, people are enjoying their jobs, and it's well organized, and you see automation and technology and things moving, it becomes a lot more appealing and exciting to be a part of than what a lot of people imagine as the history of manufacturing. And again, there are still shops that are kind of still managed that way, and they need to do their best to catch up.
Do you have any examples of some other manufacturers that have been able to be creative and maybe find some non-traditional ways to move forward from an automated standpoint?
There's one of the challenges my company had, Dynamic Group, was that we're building one-off molds. Again, they're very high precision and very complex. There's not too many mold building shops that can automate. I know there is a shop out east on the eastern coast that is a mold shop of sorts like that, and they've been able to find ways to automate that process. And so again, you're not so much looking at just a gantry robot that's moving, picking and placing, but it's also automating that setup, automating the inspection, and doing it one time and then moving on to the next project. So there's companies that have been able to adopt it that way. I was at a company the other day, one of our member companies, Jaeger Machine, and they've done a great job in investing in new equipment and just a great facility, and engage their workforce, and again, inspection equipment and different things that are, again, not just the standard traditional automation, but integrating it into the machine, tool changers, and some of that, again, isn't necessarily new and innovative. It's just reinvesting in new equipment that has that technology, or just learning how to use it within the equipment you have. And so shops like that have done a great job, and we just need to try and encourage more shops to take that path.
Nice. So depending on the process too of the automation, the training is, what would you say as far as like the average for once the automation and the robotics are implemented? I mean, how long typically, or what you've seen, takes to actually get that workforce engaged and, able to use and work alongside of it?
It really depends on the application. And again, you can have some of the more user-friendly robots that literally, it's a matter of a few minutes. You're training them how to do the operation itself.
And how much the employee plays video games and things like that,
exactly.
right?
No, that's a good point. And then obviously there's other work cells that maybe the operator has to be more engaged in setting up and interacting with the automation. So it varies quite a bit, but typically the goal is to obviously limit the operator interaction. Hopefully you've programmed the automation or the work cell so that it's fairly self-sufficient and can adapt to situations. But it really depends on the complexity of not only the system but also the product that you're making. One thing I think just to touch on is the kind of the stereotype of automation taking over the workforce, and it seems like it's a little taboo to talk about workforce and in the same conversation talk about automation. But again, I think improving those roles, and then it's an absolute necessity going forward that we aren't going to find the workers we need to be competitive, and in order to keep growing manufacturing, it's just a requirement to find ways to automate.
And how do you sell the coolness to kids? The coolness of working with robots?
Again, they've already been exposed to it in their day-to-day life. I mean, it's just becoming more and more prevalent, so I don't know that we even need to sell them on the automation side. We just need to sell them on the fact that automation and manufacturing can go hand in hand, and that, again, you don't necessarily have to go become that degreed engineer. You can get into a trade and still be involved in that exciting activity. So I think just connecting the dots, and the biggest thing, I guess, the most important answer to your question, I think, is educating the parents. I think many of the parents are still, they're becoming more supportive of manufacturing. I spent years in the Marine Corps, and I think it's equivalent to the military, where people support the military. They believe in it. They believe in manufacturing. But when their kid says, well, I want to go work at a shop rather than go to the university, people are a little hesitant. And I went to a debate between Jeff Johnson and Tim Walz the other day, and both commented on that, how they would be proud of their kids, but they would also assume that their neighbor would be looking down on it and thinking, well, that's too bad that your kid didn't go to a university. And I think it's important that we engage the parents and help them understand that these are great career paths. They can have smart, talented, successful kids that go into manufacturing and come out on the other side, with a successful career. And so it's going to take a long time to change that. It's not only improving the image of manufacturing, but improving the perception of what that means to have a career in manufacturing. It's almost a shame that all students aren't taking advantage of some of these opportunities now of, some of the post-secondary classes you can take in high school, get your college credits done, get a scholarship, go to a 2-year technical college. Again, there's grant programs that'll support you through school, that'll get you involved in working in a business, learning, and you come out of those jobs or coming out of those programs, that you could be making upwards, $45,000, $50,000 a year on day one, and quickly into a job that's $70,000, $80,000 and have no debt, and be doing that when you're, by the time you're 22.
Oh yeah.
Versus a college student that when they get out may or may not have a job, may or may not have $100,000 in debt, and still might not be in the career path that's right for them. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities, and I think we got to make sure the kids and the educators and the parents are all aware of those opportunities to kind of catapult your career.
I think you sold us, for sure.
Yeah.
You guys are going to switch career paths now?
I'm debating it right now, actually.
Well, and hearing that it's really improved since when I started, so that's good. And I think, as a parent, I have a child in college, and I think, you kind of look at that return on investment and what are you going to get when you get out of it. And, there's lots of different ways where you can have a successful career and you can have a head of household type of a job and raise a family and do all the things you want to do.
Yeah. How do you know of any like manufacturing organizations or companies that are doing like internships like with high school kids to get them integrated and absorbed and engaged, aware of the actual how much it's changed versus what they've probably heard from, like you said, their parents?
First, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the first week in October is the Minnesota statewide tour of manufacturing week. So it's recognized nationally that we kind of focus on manufacturing in the month of October and primarily the first week in October. Dream It, Do It has a website that's called statewidetourofmanufacturing.com that you can go on and companies can sign up to do tours, and then of course students and educators can go on there to find tours. So we really want to encourage students and anyone to go tour those shops and try and get a better idea so they can see some of that in action. But also, there are a lot of programs for apprenticeships, internships, a lot of companies that are doing that internally or using state programs, state funding. So there's a lot of opportunity for that. The student can end up getting through a 2-year program with very little expense and be making wages during that time. So there's a lot of companies that are taking advantage of that. A lot of companies that aren't, because again, you might have a 20 or 30 person company that can't necessarily provide those resources or the structure for it. And that's where MPMA is going to come in to help them create that structure and find the funding and things like that. Also, I'd say anyone who's interested in learning more, go to mpma.com. We've got 300 plus member companies around the state too that I personally am happy to connect anyone if you're interested. What we're trying to do too is go to the local level, find the specific high schools and say, okay, within a 10-mile radius, here are the manufacturers. Connect those to the tech programs at those high schools and get the kids into those shops, and hopefully it leads to internships or apprenticeships or getting connected to the school programs. So just encourage people to look for that and go take tours. Again, that first week in October, there'll be a lot of shops opening their doors, and they love to see youth. It's great. I love to see 10-year-olds out going through shops because fun to dream of the future.
And what do you see automation looking like in the next 5, 10, or 20 years? Where is it going?
Well, I suppose smaller, faster, again, more integrated into the human interaction. So, I'm not an automation expert, so I won't claim to understand the new technologies coming out. But obviously, some of the interactive technology with driving cars, and AGVs.
And what are AGVs?
Autonomously guided vehicles.
Oh,
okay.
So I think it's more in the realm of interaction with human is what I think it'll end up being. The cobots have been a great resource in a manufacturing cell, but I'm sure we'll find ways to automate the office and automate more in the shipping and automate, and transportation and whatnot, that it's just going to probably consume more of the non-traditional manufacturing-related activities.
So think about the jobs that we traditionally think of seeing in a manufacturing facility, and that's starting to change. Where do you see that going?
Well, like I talked about, I think the integration of engineering in those manufacturing roles. So, it's not just producing the product, but it'll be how do you produce the product in a new, innovative way. And so taking those jobs that are traditional, let's just say machinists, and kind of merging it with an applications engineer. So, again, that'll, I think, be more appealing to the youth when they're thinking about becoming an engineer, but yet they still like working with their hands. So I think we'll be evolving the jobs that we have. And again, as you look around most of these shops, you'll see a lot of people that are, I'll say, in the 45 to 55 year range where we still have some time. There's still people that'll be around for a while, but some of those skill sets took 20, 30 years to get to, and so you're not going to replace them with a 4-year apprentice. And so we've got to reduce the need for some of that, and as well as, expedite that progression so it doesn't take 20, 30 years to get to that point because you've automated so many of the processes. Now we're more relying on their intellectual skill sets and their ability to adapt, their ability to program, their ability to come up with solutions rather than just their skill set of how to do the work hands-on. There's still going to be some of that. I don't think we're anywhere near eliminating hands-on work and the finishing touches that many people have the skill set for. That's still going to take a long time. But again, in every role, not just those entry-level operator-type positions, even in the high-level roles, there's still the tedious tasks that we don't need a high-level machinist or toolmaker to do some of those things, and yet we still have them doing them because we don't have any choice.
So just from hearing all of the different aspects of automation, it sounds like it's actually making manufacturing and automation in the workplace way more sustainable than what the common concept is of where robots show up and then half the people lose their jobs. It's more of the robots show up, everybody learns how to work with them, and then production doubles and so does profit. So it just really makes more sustainable as an actual industry.
Yes. That's a good point. Well, and part of it isn't just about job security. I mean, it's changed too. So I think a lot of people get nervous about automation, not because they think it's going to take their job. Because right now, again, there's plenty of jobs out there. So I don't think there's too many people worried about not finding a job. But it's the change. It's how is my workplace going to change? How is my job going to change? My responsibilities. I've been doing it for 20 years. Now you're telling me I have to do it completely different. Or you're telling me that what I've done is now no longer valid. And and that's not the case. I mean, it's we have to grow and adapt and change. And yeah, there's going to be people that struggle with that and are nervous about it. And so we've just got to reassure them that, hey, this is going to make your job easier, more enjoyable, safer, give you more value out of what you do. I mean, a lot of the people I've known through precision manufacturing are amazingly intelligent people that really could have been, 4-year degreed engineers, but they chose to go to a 2-year technical school, and their ability to do math and to solve and to create things, use creativity, and it's just amazing the level of genius that comes out of manufacturing that, again, we typically, when we think of genius and we think of smart people, we think of universities and PhDs, and I've been around some people that I feel kind of slow and ignorant when I'm working with them because they're amazing and can do things that I could never even dream of doing. So I think taking that, again, that intellectual ability and now complementing it with automation is really what we're trying to do. It's not by any means trying to replace that skill set.
So as we wrap up, can you think of any kind of like 3 aha moments that you've had in the last 5 years that maybe somebody else hasn't had that aha moment yet?
Again, I think more, taking to heart the intrinsic value that people get out of their work. And so, again, it's not just about improving or automating for efficiency and cost reductions, but also just improving the value. I mean, I realized looking back that there were jobs that I would not want to do and I wouldn't want to ask my kids to do, but there are a lot of great jobs in manufacturing. And so really focusing on what gives people value and what they do, and again, using automation to not decrease their jobs, but to actually enhance the value you get from their jobs. And then I'll say an aha as far as, again, a transition from more of the traditional automation and looking at how do you reduce cycle times to now looking at how do we reduce those tasks, how do we take out some of the repetitive nature of jobs, and integrating that automation so that it is working with the person or complementing the person rather than trying to take the work away from the person. Again, I think more, taking to heart the intrinsic value that people get out of their work. And so, again, it's not just about improving or automating for efficiency and cost reductions, but also just improving the value. I mean, I realized looking back that there were jobs that I would not want to do and I wouldn't want to ask my kids to do, but there are a lot of great jobs in manufacturing. And so really focusing on what gives people value and what they do, and again, using automation to not decrease their jobs, but to actually enhance the value you get from their jobs. And then I'll say an aha as far as, again, a transition from more of the traditional automation and looking at how do you reduce cycle times to now looking at how do we reduce those tasks, how do we take out some of the repetitive nature of jobs, and integrating that automation so that it is working with the person or complementing the person rather than trying to take the work away from the person. Again, some of the work cells, when you're the more typical automation, you're not only investing in the automation itself, but you're closing off that work cell. You're putting it in a cage. You're using conveyance systems. It's a lot more expense. It's a lot more challenge to fix things or adjust things. It takes up a lot more workspace. And now with more integrated automation, it makes it easier to work beside them. It does make it safer. And just a better work, more organized, clean, better looking work environment as well.
I think we can all be done with that. Well, this has really been an aha moment for us as well. I think we've learned a lot, and I hope the listeners have as well. So thank you for tuning in once again to Minnesota Made, where we talk about everything manufacturing.
Thanks for having me.
And that is a wrap on another episode of Minnesota Made. If you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for more conversations about products that are being made right here in the great state of Minnesota.